Welcome to Conversations with Joe Reagan. All of his opinions are his own and not mine. This is the first of many, we hope, of conversations talking about happenings in the Colorado 5th Congressional District and actually the things that aren't happening in the Colorado 5th District. So, Joe, take it away.
Hey, Gary. It's always good to be with you and always appreciate the chance to chat about issues that are important to our 5th District. I think, looking at where we're at, we're less than just a little over a month into the new congressional session. We have Jeff Crank has settled into office, and I think when you look at how do we describe that 1 month period, it doesn't really seem like there's much of a difference between what Lamborn didn't do and what Jeff Crank isn't doing. So I think, for those folks that have been following the 5th District for a while, those of our friends and neighbors, I think you could probably ask 90% of them. They would still tell you that Doug Lamborn is sitting in that chair, keeping it warm as he has for 20 years. And I think, what does that mean for us in the 5th District? It is a continued rubber stamp for all the unpopular things that Donald Trump stands for. And that's, we saw that in polling. For those that remember about 6 months ago, I lost the Democratic primary by less than 500 votes. And I think what's upsetting to me about that, and a lot of people around town, is whether you were Democrat or Republican, there were a lot of people that looked at this sort of common sense, analytical approach to policy that I was taking and said, this is something that we can actually make a difference on in our community and not just have that rubber stamp that continues just to blindly vote along party lines, which doesn't represent the interests of we saw that within El Paso County. I think it was 65% of voters did not agree with this. I'm not even going to call it the Make America. It's the faux Make America Great agenda, because if you were really going to be making America great, you would be doing the exact opposite of what the Trump administration is doing. And there's plenty of examples over the past month that talk about that, as I'm sure you've seen as well.
Okay. Well, I assume you got Jeff Crank's email.
Mm-hmm. I do. Yeah.
And I thought it was interesting because he started off saying that he was meeting with the two sheriffs in the one in El Paso County and Teller County, mm-hmm. and about doing something about the sanctuary city designations in this state.
On the campaign trail, this was an issue that I actually got a lot of traction on, because when we talk about what does it mean to be a sanctuary city and what does it actually look like in practice, this is nothing more than virtue signaling. And at the end of the day, there were a number of Democrats in Congress that last cycle wanted to make the sort of common sense investments in border security and immigration reform that we've been talking about, probably close to 40 years right at this point. As long as I can remember, we've been talking about comprehensive immigration reform. And we had that under the last Congress. And, what we're seeing today, and let's talk about some of these executive orders, because I think that's something that people don't understand. So the Trump administration early on, and of course everything that Trump has signed into law, Republicans are calling now to codify into law, which is funny on a number of things. Because one, everything that Trump has signed into executive order has gone to the courts, because the executive branch does not have the authority to do the things that Donald Trump is putting in these executive orders. It is a grotesque violation of the constitutional authorities invested in Congress. And if there's any number, if you look at the margin that exists in the House of Representatives, literally any single congressman or congresswoman, for that matter, can halt this agenda, because they don't have the votes to hold things up. So if Jeff Crank was really serious about representing the district, he has a lot of authority to be able to stand up against his party and stop this nonsense. And when we're talking about immigration, one of the things that really stuck with me it was the removal of the restrictions on allowing immigration and customs enforcement agents to go into schools, hospitals, and places of worship. Now, let's think about that for a second. First of all, when we talk about the Constitution, one of the things that is literally in the first couple of paragraphs is talking about that the Constitution doesn't give us any rights whatsoever. The Constitution acknowledges that we are born with all of the rights that the Constitution protects us from the government to keep. And when we look at the Bill of Rights, the First Amendment, all of us, when at birth, have the right to practice religion without the interference of the government. And so allowing immigration officers to go into these sanctuaries and interrupt church services, faith services, whatever, to conduct immigration raids, that is a violation of the First Amendment. And you currently have, as of this morning I saw, there are over 20 faith-based organizations that have gone and sued the U.S. government, saying this is a violation of our ability of our First Amendment rights. And it's not just the churches, because I've talked about this in the past too. When we talk about freedom of religion, when Republicans talk about freedom of religion, they're talking about enshrining Christianity into law. When I talk about freedom of religion, I'm talking about you as an individual have the right to practice your religion as you see fit. And by doing this, you're keeping those people who are in this, regardless of their status, for practicing their religion. That is a violation of human rights. That is a violation of our Constitution and the way that we view the freedom of religion as being part of our ability to, it's a naturally born right. The two, and this one is a little more complex, the hospitals. Hospitals and schools have been a safe haven, not for a lot of the different reasons that people might think, but when you look at schools, and here's what I want to say. We talk about, well, we want to deport the criminals and the rapists. Let's ask an honest question of ourselves. How do you catch a rapist? Somebody has to report that individual. And what makes hospitals and schools and other sorts of medical facilities unique is that people that work in those facilities are mandatory reporters. And if you're not familiar with the term, if I'm as a teacher, or for me, I work in and around the medical field, in my engagement with a patient or a client, if I believe that abuse or whether physical, sexual, whatever abuse is happening, I am mandated by law to report that to the authorities. And the same goes for that's doctors, nurses, teachers, all of these folks, mandatory reporters. They have to report that. Police officers and really the entire law enforcement community has always viewed hospitals and schools as kind of an area that they don't want to be conducting direct enforcement, because at the end of the day, if you're an undocumented individual in this country and you are the victim of rape, where do you report that? And if you fear that you're going to be deported, do you report it? And that's the problem, is at the end of the day, when you're going into hospitals and schools to conduct ICE raids, you are creating a safe haven for those rapists and criminals that we're supposed to be deporting, because no one's going to deport them or no one's going to report them. And so you're enabling that criminal enterprise to continue to exploit this. And on the campaign trail last cycle, I talked quite a bit about that, of if we really are serious about immigration reform, we have to look to those individuals who are seeking to exploit the status of these undocumented immigrants in order to, whether it be sexual abuse, whether it be withholding wages, human trafficking, all of these horrible, horrible crimes that if they are not reported, they continue to just go on. And so the impact of that executive order saying, oh, we're going to go after schools, what it means is we're not going after rapists and criminals. We're going after women and children who often are the victim of those very crimes. And I just think that that's, as far as when we were, how the Republicans had been messaging this, whether they believe it or not is a different story. But the reality is, when you talk to law enforcement, this executive order is going to have the exact opposite impact of what it has on immigration. And I think having lived in a border community, so when I was in the military, I spent probably close to 10 months living in Sierra Vista, Arizona, which is about 5 miles from the Mexican border. Law enforcement inevitably does collaborate with, regardless of the sanctuary nature of the city or not. That collaboration occurs, and it's actually a very important aspect of how things work. So all of this talk of, oh, well, we're a sanctuary city, we're not a sanctuary, it has and I will go back to when the El Paso County Board of Commissioners came out and said, we are not a sanctuary community, the lawyer for the county came out and said, what they just said has zero impact on any policy that exists within El Paso County. And it was simply a virtue signaling on behalf of those folks that wanted to rile their base. But at the end of the day, if somebody shows at the hospital, they're going to get treated. If someone is homeless, you have plenty of religious-based organizations that are going to provide support to them. And that has not changed. And so whether or not you want to call yourself a sanctuary city or a non-sanctuary city is irrelevant. Because at the end of the day, you've got community organizations that are out there that continue to provide that support. And you have two options as a community. You can acknowledge the fact that that's happening and use that as an opportunity to go after the actual criminals, so the actual rapists, the people that are exploiting undocumented immigrants and conducting human trafficking. Those are the criminals we want to go after. And again, if we're really serious about this, understanding why someone comes to this country. If we don't hold the companies, the individuals that are hiring undocumented immigrants accountable, then you're never going to stop the problem. And again, it's about exploitation. If I have an undocumented worker that works for me, I can pay them a sub-minimum wage because they can't report me. That's exploitation. That's human trafficking. And those are the sorts of crimes that we have to be going after. And that's where the Democrat bill, actually it wasn't even Democrat, it was a bipartisan bill, was actually getting to the root of the problem of immigration reform and addressing it in a manner that would be far more effective than anything, whether the president or Republican-controlled Congress has even talked about in the past month. So I think if you're one of those folks in the community and says, I care about immigration, well, guess what? We all care about immigration. We don't want to see it because illegal immigration is tied to human trafficking, and we don't want to do that. But if you're serious about stopping that problem, the way Republicans under Donald Trump are aligned is not addressing that problem. And I have not looked at border. I was trying to find border numbers this afternoon to see if we could figure it out, but I don't think there's been any change at all to those numbers. And I don't think, if anything, I think it's going to get worse over the course of the next couple of months.
Okay, yeah. One of the other things, and it's close to the same area that you just began speaking about, is apparently the president signed this executive order to halt fentanyl coming across the border. And I don't think anybody's really told him that it's this gang that is bringing them. I think the name of the gang is called Gringos. I think the Gringos are bringing those aboard or into the country, and not the immigrants that are coming here. So maybe they ought to look at the Gringos. I mean, that's a pretty big gang, you know.
Well, look at. I'd say this. Not even look at that. Let's look to our law enforcement officers that deal with this on a day in and day out basis, and ask them where the real problem is. And if you look at decades worth of understanding of how drugs are illicitly brought into this country, it's usually through legitimate border crossings. I mean, this stuff is coming through legitimate ports of entry, as you said. Generally speaking, it is a lot of Americans that are actually trafficking that stuff in. And again, exploitation is the word here, because a lot of these individuals are either being coerced into doing this illegal activity because either they're being threatened, because they are the victim of abuse, so that is how a lot of this is happening. So again, the bipartisan bill that was brought up in the last Congress that Republicans tanked twice because of the fact that they wanted Donald Trump to be able to claim this victory lap on immigration, which he's claimed it, but there's zero factual evidence to say it's done anything. But strengthening the enforcement efforts at ports of entry to the United States. And there's a number of different ways to be able to do that, but you do need a technology solution. And the way to go back to that is go back to the Association of Border Patrol Officers that supported the bipartisan bill, that said, what the Trump administration is putting forward does not. It would be a compliment to say that this is a solution in search of a problem, because it is actually making the problem far worse. So I think that, again, this is Republican virtue signaling, trying to say that they're doing something when the statistics on enforcement, time will tell, but based on how we understand the problem to be, everything that Republicans are doing in Congress right now, everything that the president is doing with the full support of Republicans like Jeff Crank, is the exact opposite of what our law enforcement officers are telling us that we need to be doing. And that's where I think Democrats need to be more engaged in talking to moderate Republicans and building that coalition. Because again, with the margin that you have in both the House and Senate, it only takes one or two representatives to stand up against Donald Trump, and none of them are doing it. Jeff Crank refuses to stand up to Donald Trump, and he could, but he doesn't want to because he's afraid of Elon Musk. He's afraid of getting primaried, and that is the modern day Republican Party of fall in line behind the great leader and just do what you're told.
Well, I think what we have to do is give Oklahoma Senator James Langford credit for that bipartisan immigration bill that was tanked by the Republicans, because he's probably one of the most conservative members of the Senate that there is, and it was his bill. Democrats got on board with it and said, this is a good thing. And of course, President Biden was on board with it too.
Yep.
So, I mean, we have to give credit where credit's due.
You're right.
Okay. So, I thought it was interesting, the whole thing. But, we have things to do here in this country we have to watch out for. And of course, Congressman Crank is on the Natural Resources Committee, if I believe, or subcommittee.
Yep.
And he mentioned about minerals and protecting the minerals. And of course, we've got ourselves so caught up in our shorts on computers and exotic things for our cars and on our PCs and laptops that they take certain types of rare minerals. And we don't have them. We have some of them, but not all of them. And I watched him grill a witness, and I was wondering, was he ever going to say anything important to the witness? Because it was just like he was reading a speech, and of course he was blaming the prior administration, and that's becoming old hat. That shtick has got to go. I mean, you have to start taking responsibility. And of course, I never heard any positive contribution in that conversation with the witness that Congressman Crank put out there for us to latch on to and to chew on and to debate. So I thought that was very interesting. So,
and this is, when we look, let's take that to the next level. When we talk broadly about energy policy, and to some extent that also means talking about how we manage federal lands. And to those of us out here in Colorado, that's a big deal. How are we going to manage these lands in a way that is going to be responsible? I mean, Colorado has a long history of being involved in the mining population, but we have to be, when we're talking about lithium mining specifically, there is a very large environmental impact there. And this is one of those areas where Does that mean we shouldn't do it? Well, we have to we got to be able to make those choices, and there's ways to mitigate it. There's better ways to mine it than what we currently have available, but it's going to require investment. And at the end of the day, a lot of these choices come down to, let's look at the economics of the matter and figure out, as a government, we really can be making some smart investments to allow us to continue to thrive in the clean energy space. And I've always pointed to Colorado Springs Utility as being an example of that long-term thinking, right? When the planning began to take the Drake plant offline, that was taking into account not just the energy needs of the community, but also making sure that investment was ramped up over a course of time, so that we didn't see the loss of energy, and we didn't have that. And that's where, from a policy perspective, we need to be a lot smarter in our usage of natural resources, not only to protect the environment, but also to make sure we remain competitive in the market. I mean, clean energy is the way of the future. There's no doubt about that. That is, even the energy companies recognize the fact that there is a need to switch over to clean fuels. When we talk to the labor unions about what that transition looks like, the terminology that we talk about is fair transitions. We want to make sure that as we transition over to a clean energy market, that we're keeping in mind that we're also training the workforce of the future to be able to have those high-paying jobs. We want those to be jobs that are successful in the community. That is going to require investments in workforce development, and quite frankly, it's an area that I've worked in the past. When we talk about, like, in the veteran space, looking at how vocational rehab can be used, but in a broader conversation, how do we incorporate upskilling throughout the course of someone's career? That's an investment that has to be made. It's either going to be made by private corporations, which very rarely do you see, or it's going to require a community investment in things like community colleges and upskilling programs. And that's how we continue to keep a competitive economy. That's how we continue to keep a thriving middle class. And the unions have done this for decades. I mean, this is part of the advantage of union membership, is that upskilling that comes along with your union membership. You're able to continue to upskill so that those union laborers are, truly representative of the best of their trade. And unions got a bad rap in the 70s and 80s because there was corruption, but those things have changed. And again, you saw policy that addressed that. You provided workers with more individual liberties, and we just got to make sure that pendulum doesn't go too far in the wrong direction, because now you see workers being punished, you see workers being exploited. Here in town, I mean, just look at the thing with the Kroger Albertson merger, and how that's impacting workers and impacting our groceries, our grocery prices as well. This is going to be, this is going to be the story 2 years from now. Is, what is Trumpflation going to look like? Well, guess what? In 1 month, the way he's going, you're all going to be begging for Biden economics, because it's a mess. And this is somewhat related. I know you talked about minerals, and now I'm going to go talk about eggs. But I had a friend of mine who works on a federal grant for the Department of Agriculture that does the avian monitoring, and that funding has been cut. And I saw the other day you have a couple hundred farms here in Colorado that now are unable to produce eggs because they can't do it safely. Well, guess what? You thought egg prices were bad before? Well, you better stock up, or you better buy chickens, because it's only going to get worse.
Well, how about powdered eggs?
Oh, God, don't even start, Navy.
Hey, my wife picked up 3 packages of powdered eggs. She's going to give it a go.
No, but but this is the sort of pressure that's being put on the American families. And, when you go back and like I said, I'm a business guy, right? So I understand the economics of what's happening. And you go back and say, well, what was the cause of inflation over the past 4 years? And it really came down to Donald Trump's irresponsible spending during his administration. That is what drove up inflation over the past 4 years. And, the way that Biden managed the economy was able to temper that to some extent. And was it perfect? No. Should we follow that model in the future? Probably not. But at the end of the day, the policies that were focused on strengthening the middle class, bringing down those prices, and stopping corporations from gouging prices, that was the sort of thing that kept us in check. And now you have the Fed saying, well, actually, we don't know if we want to be able to, we got to be careful on what we're doing here because the economic indicators are already getting shaky. And now with the uncertainty created by an administration that has, I mean, you look at the cast of characters that now make up the cabinet, and I hate to say, you've got some people that are grossly underqualified for some very serious positions. And that is what this is. And I'll be honest with you. And if there are people out there that are all big Trump fans, well, let me tell you, I was not a doomsday sayer at the beginning of the first Trump administration. When Trump first got elected in 2016, and I looked at the people that he surrounded himself with, I looked at it and said, you know what, I don't agree with these people policy-wise, but he surrounded himself with some really smart people and fired every one of them within months. And so in this administration, you see a bunch of yes men and women that have zero experience in working in government. You have Elon Musk that's out there doing God knows what, and it is a bunch of people that have, like I said, zero experience in governance or how to govern, and it hurts. Look at the federal the federal funding freeze that was put out for nonprofits. You're talking about cutting funding to child care centers. You're talking about cutting funding to hospitals and nonprofits that are doing really important work out there. And this does have an immediate impact on our family, right? You can criticize what you want for having universal access to health to daycare, but guess what? If you're a single mom or you're a single dad and you don't have access to child care, well, guess what? You can't work. So you want people getting to work, you have to give them the ability to get to work. And that means that in some cases you do need to reduce cost child care. We got to be responsible. I agree. I would consider myself, in a classical sense, to be a fiscal conservative. I don't want to see us overspend. I don't want to see wasteful spending. But the way that the Trump administration just said, well, we're going to cut it all off, is grossly irresponsible. Cutting funding for USAID, do you realize that costs the state of Kansas like $2 billion in a week? $2 billion in a week that farmers in our neighbor Kansas are losing out on, because when we talk about, and this is the misconception, and again I talked about this on the campaign, foreign aid does not mean cash going overseas. Foreign aid oftentimes means spending money here in the United States to send stuff overseas. And you can ask our friends in Kansas, because those people in Kansas make billions of dollars off of USAID grants so that we can send grain to hungry countries. That is supporting U.S. jobs that are now at risk because Donald Trump has no idea how to govern.
Well, I've got to add, you have to go a little further north when it comes to the farmers here, because they're getting their contracts canceled by the Canadians.
That too. Yep.
Because the Canadians don't want the volatility that is happening right now.
You mean the 51st state is what you're talking about?
No. No, we'll become a Canadian province before they'll become a 51st state. So.
As long as we don't take Quebec. We'll take the rest of Canada, but we don't want Quebec.
Why, don't you want to speak French?
Oui.
Okay, Joe, let's wrap this one up. And this is our first episode of Joe Reagan Conversations. You got any final thoughts? Because that's all we have left.
Yeah. Well, one area that we didn't talk about on the immigration piece, and this was something that as a veteran hit really, really close to me. And again, the number one role of a representative in Congress is to make sure that you're available to the people that you're serving. And there was an example the other day. So if you don't know this, we have about 500 Afghan families that reside here in Colorado Springs. These are people that are recipients of the Special Immigrant Visa Program. People here legally. And these are people that served alongside folks like myself in Afghanistan that supported the U.S. government mission while we were there and have gotten this Special Immigrant Visa. One family in particular who I had a chance to meet, the entire family had not gotten a chance to get out. Actually, two of their children are currently in India awaiting their flight to the United States. with Trump's blanket order canceling the asylum and refugee operations to include the special immigrant visa program. These 2 children, both under the age of 15, are now stuck in India without a visa. And the Indian government has said, well, if you don't have a visa to get to the United States, you have to go back to Afghanistan. Where these, again, 2 children under the age of 15 whose parents are here, desperately fighting to get them here. When they reached out to Congressman Crank's office, they got nothing in return. And thankfully, I had a good contact with Senator Bennett's office that was able to support us with that. And so I guess the closing remark is, if you find Congressman Crank's office to be unresponsive, don't give up there. Do reach out to Senators Bennett and Hickenlooper. They have amazing staff. I work with both of them. Make sure you're getting the help with those federal. Do not rest. If you don't get the answer you need from Crank, go to our senators as well. We need people that are advocating for us, and every experience I've had with Senators Bennett and Hickenlooper has been extraordinarily positive in their ability to deliver for people in this district. So I would just say that's my advice for the week is be persistent and hang in there. I think when you look at how these things are getting held up in the courts, the right thing's going to happen. So continue to get out there, do good for your neighbors, just like I'm doing every day, trying to get out there and supporting the veteran population. But get out there, support one another, be nice to each other. It's that easy.
Well, I'll be waiting for Congressman Crank's first town hall meeting.
He was supposed to. Someone had told me he was supposed to speak at a veteran group last weekend, and I went to it. I don't know whether he was later or what, but I had to run before he got there. I was hoping to talk to him, but I haven't seen him out yet. I've been at a bunch of events this past month, and I haven't seen him once.
So thank you so very much for listening, and until next time.